Hello, and welcome to Windows in Time, the stories we haven't told, the evolving narrative of historic Hanley Farm, presented by Jackson County Library Services. My name is Megan, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Medford branch. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and the Modoc Nation, as well as the Shasta, Takelma, and Lagawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. We take this moment to recognize the Indigenous people whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for Indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Southern Oregon Historical Society, which partners with Jackson County Library Service in this wonderful program. Today, we're really happy to welcome someone who's been with the society for quite a while, Emma Walruff. And I asked her, Emma, when did you first remember history or become interested in it? And there's an expression, turnabout is fair play, but this is remarkable. Her first experience that she recalls of history was coming to Hanley Farm in the 4th grade and taking part in Children's Heritage Festival. Well, that's our classic, and there's over 1,000 young people, 4th graders a year, that have been coming through this experience since about 1986. So there's a long history. It used to be at the courthouse. Now it's at the farm. She's a graduate from SOU in history with a minor in Native American Studies. She'll be, this coming fall, beginning an MBA program at SOU with a focus on nonprofit management. And with that, I turn it over to Emma.
Hi, everyone. So as Larry said, my name is Emma Walruff. In addition to my studies, I'm also the registrar of the Southern Oregon Historical Society. And I did this project with a lot of help from the people at Southern Oregon Historical Society, who I'm very happy and proud to work with. So today I will be giving my presentation, The Stories We Haven't Told, the Evolving Narrative of Hanley Farm. So through my studies at Southern Oregon University and my experience in the Native American Studies program and my continued, at that time, volunteer efforts with the Southern Oregon Historical Society, I began to realize that the history that we tell at Hanley Farm right now is really only about the last 175 years. The oldest archaeological finds that have been found at Hanley Farm are dating between 12,000 and 7,000 years ago. Now, given as we all know and love Hanley Farm, I'm sure we already know the lovely history that is told there, but I will give a brief overview. The land that is now called Hanley Farm was originally done as a donation land claim in Township 37. The claims were number 67 and 68, which were done by the Clinton and Welton families. This was a father and mother, their daughter, and her husband. They did 2 land claims right next to each other, and then they built their log cabin right over the middle so that they could develop both lands at the same time. The Donation Land Claim Act basically said that a man could claim, it was, 130 acres of land, and as long as he developed it and lived on it for 5 years, then the land would belong to him and his family. The Weltons and the Clintons did this, and in 1857, it was bought by a young businessman, Michael Hanley, for his wife and children to live upon. They did this. Mr. Hanley introduced alfalfa farming to the area and was very successful. In the 1880s, running of the farm was taken over by his eldest living daughter, Alice Hanley, when he and his wife took ill. And she eventually inherited the farm and the closest area surrounding it upon her father's death in 1889. Alice continued to run the farm, and when her older brother John and his wife died, she welcomed her niece Claire to live upon the farm with her and taught Claire the very same things that her father and mother taught her: how to run the farm, how to keep a household, things such as that. And when Alice died, she left the farm to Claire and Claire's two sisters, Mary and Martha, who Claire invited to live with her upon this farm as well. And they lived there their entire lives. The last living Hanley was Miss Martha Hanley, who would go on to be the first curator of the Southern Oregon Historical Society, donating the house and 36 acres of the property to the Historical Society to take care of. Now, I love this history. This gives us such a unique perspective as well for this area, although we do actually have a lot of strong independent women that you hear about in history in this era, because we do also have Carrie Beekman, who is wonderful to hear about. But this is two generations of women who took care of this wonderful property, never married, never had children, and dedicated their lives to preserving their family's history. This is an absolutely wonderful history. However, the way that we interpret it today is still back a little bit in how museum interpretation is done currently. Museums as a whole have evolved over the years. Museums were originally made as a place for the elite and wealthy to store their most interesting belongings, things that they got overseas. And these were generally arranged in things that are now referred to as curio cabinets, cabinets of curiosities. If you remember the really old, the classic circus, you had your tent of curiosities that you wander through. It's the same kind of thing. It's a cabinet that's filled of objects that invoke a sense of exotic nature, things that are a bit different. And that was how museums tended to be. There's very little information given beyond this was found in Africa, or this was made by a native person, along those lines. Over time, they have evolved. One that is really popular that you still see around today are these dioramas. Dioramas are lovely. They give you a good look at what a person looks like. There's a lot of them that have been done in amazing ways. But they're also static. An issue that we see a lot in museums and when telling Native American history is it is often left at the beginning of the timeline. It's something that was. This reinforces different narratives that have been put in place over time, such as those as the disappearing Indian, the idea that these are people that are no more. They are people who were, and then in this place was then put the great American pioneer who then developed land as it should have been used. And this is not accurate. These people are still alive. Their descendants are still living and carrying on their wonderful traditions and cultures. So, one great quote: whereas museums were in the past perceived as elitist institutions, today many institutions are developing closer working relationships with the communities whose cultures they interpret and are providing museums that have a relevant and functional role to play in the contemporary issues which face Indigenous and other ethnic groups. Creating museums, in a lot of ways, can be places of trauma for many groups when it's not properly addressed, when things are skirted over. And it is more within the current look of museums to create places of healing, which I strive to do with Hanley Farm. Now, to tell a brief history of the land at Hanley Farm. The land, which is now known as Hanley Farm, is known to have been a place that was a living site for the Upper Takelma peoples. They did seasonal rotations of living and farming. And one of these was at the area that we call Hanley Farm. Back in the day, Jackson Creek, which now runs behind the farm, ran through the farm area. If you were looking out over the scenery, you can even see where the swell in the land is, where the bed used to be. The Takelma people would set up camp on the banks of this river to process acorns from the black oak trees that were once upon this property. They would use their mortars and pestles along with the lake water to process acorns in use for many different goods. And at the end of the season, instead of carrying around this giant thing, which weighed between 10, 15, 25 pounds, they vary in size, and I have definitely picked one up. I would not want to carry that around when moving between homes. They would instead bury them in the ground, and these women would tell their daughters and their daughters' daughters and their granddaughters where they should go to dig them up again the next year. And this happened for generation after generation for time and millennia until you had 1853 and the gold rush. It was at this point that the Upper Takelma people and the other Native Americans of the Rogue Valley, with the signing of the Table Rock Treaty, were removed to the reservation at the base of the Table Rocks. They lived there for a few years before you had the 1856 Western Oregon Indian removal. Now, in the different things that I studied, a term that is used for this is also the Oregon Trail of Tears. You had people who were moved up the coast, people who were put onto ships, people who came from all the coastern areas, as well as this more inland area, as you can see by my map here. This would be the route that was taken by the Upper Takelma. That would eventually land in the reservations that are now known as the Confederated Tribes of Siletz and the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. And I liked this here. Hanley Farm is just about here. And these peoples still live today. Their descendants are still there and are still living in their cultures. And we have a wonderful opportunity to bring them into this land that we have and welcome them to once again use their ancestral homelands. Now, the way that Hanley Farm is interpreted is not wrong at all. The way that is interpreted, the way that the Native American history was left at the beginning of the timeline, is entirely informed on what has been available to us. Hanley Farm was transferred over to SOHS in the 1980s, and at that time you had books such as Requiem for a People by Stephen Dow Beckham. This is a wonderful book. It is. It is one of the first ones that is noted to actually be focused on the Native experience over those of the white settler experience, and is widely regarded as a very groundbreaking book for its time. It also reinforces the disappearing Indian, with the last paragraph speaking of the tears of the last Takelma watering the trees, like that. There are wonderful resources now, such as this one that I cited a lot in my research, The People Are Dancing Again by Charles Wilkinson, which was put together with help from the Confederated Tribes of Siletz and is structured beautifully to tell the story of the different tribal peoples of Oregon, both before contact, during contact, and then their current lives today, and how that is structured going forward. The narratives at historic house museums, as said by Hilary Lau, are often romantic when they focus on the traditional heroes whose efforts created the better world in which visitors live in today. And that is true. You go to a museum not only to learn, but to be entertained. And that is wonderful. It's a wonderful thing that history can transport us to these different areas. But it can also have harmful effects on the people that it actually talks about as well. One example of this that is harmful to both the native peoples who originally lived on this land, but also to the Hanleys themselves, would be the story of Mary Harris Chambers. I don't know how many of us have heard this story before, but I would like to recontextualize it a little bit. In 1853, there was a man. His name was John Lupton. He lived in Jacksonville, and he decided that he was done with being accepting of the native peoples who lived within the land that was Jacksonville, and decided that he would take up arms with a group of other men from Jacksonville and would go to a settlement that was at the mouth of I believe it was the Butte Creek. Little Butte Creek, yep. And would kill every person they came across. And they did. Men, women, and children. There's not an exact count of how many people died that day. Eyewitness accounts place it between 25 and 300. There's no very definite number, but it was a large number, and we do know women and children were killed as well. This is known as the Lupton Massacre and is largely noted as the first event in what is known as the Rogue River War. The next day, I believe it was Ty John, in moving from the area and gathering people as he went along, killed people on the surrounding farmsteads, going through the very same way that these white settlers did to his family and killing the men, women, and children. And this is what happened with Mary Harris Chambers and her daughter, Anne Sophia Harris. Their farmstead was one of these. And Mary Harris defended her home and she defended her daughter, and they lived. Mary Harris Chambers would go on to marry Mr. Chambers, who lived in Jacksonville. Her daughter, Anne Sophia Harris, would marry John Love and have multiple children. And eventually, Anne Sophia, along with their youngest daughter, unfortunately died from what accounts seem to be as the plague, breakout of the plague. And her children were raised by her mother, Mary Ann Chambers. One of these women was Mary Love, Mame Love, as she would become to known, who would marry John Hanley and eventually have the girls, Mary, Martha, and Claire. And of course, Mary Hanley became the first curator of the Jacksonville Historical Society, which is wonderful. But this does not take away from the fact that this was a very traumatic event. It was a traumatic event for all people involved, and that trauma moves through generations. It leaves Hanley Farm as a place of pain. It leaves Mary Hanley and the Hanleys not being very open in original interpretation of the house to the people who lived there before them. And that makes sense. But Hanley Farm has such amazing opportunity. It is an amazing place and should be a place of love and healing, just as it is for those of us who go there today and can appreciate the wonderful scenery. And there is a way that we can do this. So, how? How do we help heal generations of trauma? We start by acknowledging it. We revise the house tour. It needs to be done anyway. There are many things that are not fitting with current best practices when it comes to museum tours. We revise the house tour. We fix the way that we talk about Mary Harris Chambers, and rather than make it a pioneer story of how the white people stood strong, we make it into the tragedy that it is. And we don't leave this to be their only note. A very unfortunate thing about this tragedy is also that Mary Harris, her daughter, her granddaughters, at least a paragraph, and I looked at all of them, at least a paragraph in each of their obituaries tell of this event. Over half of Mary Harris Chambers' obituary is this event, which sells short what type of woman she was. She raised her grandchildren. She was a well-respected woman, and she was a prized sheep rearer. She was known for her wool. And just as the Native people of the Lupton Massacre have not been acknowledged, they're people. Their descendants are still alive. They're at Grand Ronde Siletz, and they deserve that acknowledgement. So, revising the house tour, making it human. These people were humans. Isn't that crazy? History is all humans, and none of them lived in a vacuum. Everything they did is still alive today because we talk about it. And because their descendants are alive, we still have Hanleys in the valley. And these people were human. And that's such an amazing thing to be able to talk about human history. And then, of course, interpretation of the land. Right now, Hanley Farm historical interpretation is really focused on the house, which the house is awesome. I understand that. But we have 36 acres of farmland that has been used as a farm for generations upon generations. If we up our interpretation of the land itself, talking about different farming practices, and also reaching out to tribal partnership. As I said, we have 36 acres of land. A lot of it is currently not really being used. We have a hill that used to be full of sheep. I'm afraid it's no longer full of sheep. And we have lots of farmland that is available. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could invite Native peoples onto the land to farm their cultural plants, as well as continue education of their cultural practices? A program that I've looked into that is very wonderful, I've seen their work at Southern Oregon University, is the Vesper Meadow Education Program. Vesper Meadow is on Indian Memorial Road, and they have a few different programs that I think we can take inspiration from and we could take partnership from as well. There's the Indigenous Garden Network. This is where they're educating Native youth on different plants that were used in their culture for generations upon generations, things that are actually native to the land, such as this little flower that's a camas flower. Healing Landscapes is another program they use, and that is reintroducing native plants and farming practices to different areas of land that have been heavily used for agriculture. As you know, cow farming, which is one of the things that was cattle rearing, which is one of the things that was done by the Hanleys, generally kind of destroys the soil that it is upon. And this is one of those ways that you can help give back to the land. And then cultural burning. Of course, we hear fire in Oregon and we are all very scared. However, Oregon and the Oregon natives did have a way of controlling land wildfires, and that was cultural burning, scheduled burns that would recycle those nutrients back into the land and take away the brush that really feeds a wildfire. And we have a lot of brush. These pictures I have here, three of them, including the flower, were taken from the Vesper Meadow Education Program site, one of which being an SOU outing. And the other one was taken by from a cultural burn report, which was sponsored by UC Davis. This is just an idea of a plan. This is looking at what we have and what I know we can be, because Hanley Farm is so amazing. As Larry said, Hanley Farm was where I learned that history can be fun. History is living. History is people. And we really need to work to acknowledge all of the people that make history as amazing as it is. And these are just a few ways we can do this. By working together with our partners, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, as well as the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians, we can create a place that is healing for all, that teaches that history is human. History is not some abstract thing that is out there in the past. History is not over. History continues. And I hope that this project can be a step in that direction. Thank you.